Hello and welcome to Strange New Worlds. My setup is not prepared to do the Pike pose. Yes, the first episode, new series premiere of Strange New Worlds. Now, if you're new to this channel, which I suspect a good amount of you are, then I'm basically going to do a brief intro, having not seen this episode yet, with my thoughts going into it, and then in the chapters I'll actually get into the review. So that's just how that's gonna work. Yes, welcome back as well to my old fans who have gone without me for a bit because of Picard. But I'll be honest, I haven't caught up. I've still just seen episode 8. Like, I'll get to them eventually, but amazingly I haven't had them spoiled. No one's talking about it. But we're not here to go into Strange New Worlds. No, we are. We're here to go into Strange New Worlds, not Picard. The interesting show, because nearly everyone is super hyped for this show. I think I will grow into it. I think I'll love this show eventually. But I'm expecting disappointment, because as I've talked about before on this channel quite extensively, so I won't go too much, and I know the review is probably going to be real long, so I'm going to try and keep this in so short. I just need my expectations set, because there's the strange dichotomy. I mean, Pike is amazing. Pike, in one episode, ended what was left of the Kirk versus Picard debate, because it obviously isn't Kirk. And for some people, it's not even Picard. He's the perfect original series era captain and style captain. There's the Enterprise bridge. I mean, God, I gushed over that in my trailer analysis. There's so much of this show that's right. But then there's also, for me, the vast majority of early Discovery's problems were its setting. And more specifically, its setting when you're not going to be hyper faithful to the original series. And from what I've seen in the trailers, it's just the little things. Robert April, who's been recast as someone who looks completely different. You have what looks like T'Pring in the trailers, despite Spock having never met T'Pring. Like, getting the little details wrong really irks me, especially with so much legacy characters going on here. Some other hints, like in a Spock-Chapel relationship. That's the sort of thing that really gets me. And I'm just not expecting a pure return to TOS. But I loved Discovery Season 4. I've highly praised it. I called it one of the best, season storylines of Trek. No, I think I did call it the best. But if you told me that Season 4 Discovery was going to be a return to the heights of Deep Space Nine Next Generation, I would have been extremely disappointed, because Discovery's not that. Discovery's made its own thing. That makes it work well. Like, Discovery is so good because it's doing its own thing, not that return. And you also have the characters I've said before. I hate Ethan Peck Spock with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. To no fault of Ethan Peck, just, it's the biggest character assassination I've ever seen. And even Number 1, who we don't really know too much about. What we do really know, we get a good look at her in Q&A, the short trek, in which she gives Spock the advice to, I believe her exact words is, hide your weird, and about how she got as far as she has in Starfleet by hiding her weird, which could be a character arc, and in fact likely is, of, not doing that. But the fact that a human from Earth in this era of Star Trek said that is the least Star Trek thing that has ever happened. Except, actually, I was going to say, unless Picard did go with the nightmare ending. As I said, I haven't seen it, that we talked about with Girardi and the Borg. But that's kind of the same problem. My fear with those characters, though, is that it's going to be, in fact, I know to some extent it's going to be like Discovery Season 3, which was a fantastic show that also happened to have Michael Burnham in it. And every scene without Burnham in it in that season was fantastic. Every scene with her in it, I just wanted her to leave. And so it's the balances. How much of that am I going to get with Spock? Like, knowing how they're going to treat the canon, their era, and all that stuff. Once I know that, because I don't think it's going to be a bad show. I think it's going to be a great show. But I need to know what to expect. And I'm perfectly happy to be blown away by this episode and say I was wrong, eat my own hat. But I have two options here, right? is I could be blown away and amazed at how wrong I was and how good this show is, but I'm not gonna be overly disappointed. I guess if I'm expecting disappointment, I might be disappointed, but like I expected it. But we all remember season 1 of Picard, where we went in rather skeptical, generally. We saw Remembrance and went, my god, TNG is back, Star Trek is back, this is amazing. And nowadays, even the people who love season 1 of Picard can't talk about it without acknowledging the flaws in its structure and pacing and all that guff. So yeah, I think it'll take a few episodes for me to get that balance, but I mean, this is the one from the trailer that... God, it's the dichotomy. Like, the scenes where he's in the negotiations and stuff look great. I mean, that's the thumbnail on here. Also, the thing of, like, not Picard. I'm gonna do that a lot, aren't I? Oh, God. Of Pike having to, like, kind of be drawn out of exile by April. Like, I don't know. That's not really the stuff I'm coming for. And it might be good. The arc, this is actually really relevant. The arc of, the cage, the menagerie, and whatever the Discovery episode is. It's one I really don't like. I should know the name. But the one where Pike gets the vision that, you know, he's gonna be in that beepy wheelchair. That's how his story ends. Is my favorite multi-series and sort of no right order arc. It is one of, if not my favorite arc in all of Star Trek for many reasons. I'll get into it probably in a more relevant episode. Getting that developed more could enhance that series so much and enhance Pike so much. And so yeah, that's the thing. It's a blank slate. I don't know what to expect. And so what I want is my expectations set. That's what I'm looking for in this episode, is to go, okay, I know what I'm gonna get next week, and I can enjoy it a lot better. So yeah, hopefully this isn't too long. I actually have a job interview today. Yeah, I gotta wrap this up in like 3 hours, so there is an upper cap on how long I can talk about this. So yeah, I'm gonna watch the episode, and I'll see ya on the other side. Particularly if I happen to drop dead while watching this episode, and then you, later in the existence of the universe, also die, and then we see each other on the other side. When you set out to recreate the original series for a modern audience and truly recapture that feeling, there is an incredibly important question you have to ask. Your first step, really, is what is the original series? At its core, what is the original series and what makes it unique? And as someone who really loves the original series and who brought this Enterprise with me across state and not the Disco Prize, well, I think that has always been really clear to me, even before modern Star Trek, what the original series is. Obviously, it's those core Starfleet Federation ideas, but so are all of them, right? What makes the original series is gallivanting across the galaxy with a complete disregard for the rules, those principles laid down, but also going from planet to planet, civilization to civilization, week to week, largely just wreaking havoc and utterly destroying them without recognizing either the potential consequences of your actions, that they could in any way go wrong, or that they're likely to go wrong, but simultaneously doing so generally with kind of like a bit of a fluffy Starfleety value message, getting that across. And also, of course, just a sprinkle of not really gelling with the canon that would be established in the 80s when, well, we actually invented canon. But, and here's the most important part, having left that episode of the original series, which is all of them, basically, having enjoyed it. And you can color me impressed, because I can safely say that this episode has perfectly recreated the original series. I also think I've got a good starting point for that, getting my expectations set, because I think you had just about everything in this show at various levels. I mean, opening, from the first speech, I was in love. If I could make a Star Trek, probably movie, honestly, it would be a movie or like a series. It'd have to be a season. It'd have to be a long-running thing, right? The thing I would make would be awful because I'm not a writer. But if I could like just dictate actual writers and stuff and tell them what to make, like if I was Alex Kurtzman, and surrounded myself by the right talent. Not saying Alex Kurtzman can't write, but if I had that position, the movie I would make, we'll call it a movie, is in the Star Trek universe, but it's not the Federation, it's not even any alien we know. It's just some rando alien civilization. Like it's basically First Contact is what I want to make, but not like from Earth, from the alien perspective, where maybe it is the Federation that shows up, or maybe it's just someone completely different. Maybe there's no Federation, but really looking in depth at like loads of the aspects and the whole world, like not broken, a wasteland, war-torn wasteland, post-apocalyptic horror. That's the word. Not like that. Like kind of our society pushed in a few decades. That would be fascinating. As I said in Season 4 Discovery, I adore First Contact stories. And that intro, when I first saw it, I kind of laughed. Like, it's real interesting that the very first shot of Strange New Worlds looks like they just went to, like, Paramount's back lot and shot a corridor. But I was like, no, it actually is. I was wondering if maybe it was the, Tomorrow is Yesterday, is it? Or All Our Yesterdays? Something like that. Where, like, the Enterprise went back to Earth in the past. But the reveal that it's just some alien watching First Contact happen was amazing. And then from that, the bits with Pike, I'm not sure what film he was watching. I was just at home. I don't think... I'm not even sure I had fallen in love with Lower Decks this quickly. Like, it was perfect. The way they're handling that arc of Pike knowing how he's going to die, or functionally die in his mind. Like, well, as he put it, it's stopping the person he is at that moment. Because in the little beepy wheelchair, he can't captain, he can't teach, he has no mobility, and yeah, you just can't be a captain anymore. And I think it's setting up really well how we're getting to a Spock that laid out the plan that we see in Menagerie, because that always did feel a bit weird that it kind of suddenly, Spock was like, bam, I've got a plan in the Menagerie. And the reason, I'll elaborate, the reason I liked, okay, the reason that the modern stuff is really enhancing that arc for me is when I first saw the Menagerie, which was probably the first episode in that series I watched, is a kid, like a little kid. And I remember this being true even then. And every time I watched it, the look the actor who plays Pike has on his face is... And I don't know if it's intentional. Obviously, they weren't thinking of this plot line, or if I'm misreading it. But to me, it's always had this weird, eerie look of knowing acceptance. I don't think I've talked about this on the channel before, but it's the face of someone who... I'm trying to define it without saying it looks like what it is. It looked, but to me at the time, it looked like someone who had prepared for it almost, or just knew what their life was going to be and accepted it. It's a really hard thing to describe abstractly. And I'd kind of, I don't know, it was just something amazing about that episode that's always stuck with me. And then I remember watching Discovery, season 2, the episode where Pike actually finds out, and I went, that is what I saw. I saw the face of a man who spent almost a decade knowing that this would happen and living up. This Pike did his captaincy. He applied to the academy as a teacher, got accepted. He entered this training program. He did these trips many times a day, probably knowing that one day one of them would go wrong. And you can see just on his mission, the one where the red alert sounds or the automatic alarm goes, and everyone kind of frantically runs around, and he just sits there for a moment because it's the acknowledgement that this is it, and that he's ready for it, and he knows what's going to happen. And afterwards, when he's in his beepy wheelchair, he wakes up from whatever coma, probably in his wheelchair, he already knew. And he'd spent a decade knowing that his life was going to be in some home or cared for something, just being fed through tubes, not being able to communicate other than your once for yes, twice for no, and just the acceptance of that. And so it builds up where not only did Discovery give me that, like, it put the action to the feeling, to the expression, but elaborating is just gonna let me see how he gets to the acceptance. And the stuff with Spock and Pike were great because it always seemed weird to me in the Menagerie that Spock just he heard that this happened to Pike, because I kind of hope that Spock never knows how Pike is gonna die, just that he knows it's something horrific. He hears in the original series that, hey, this has happened to Pike, and he just instantly has a plan and executes it. And I want to see a Spock knowing he has to do something, that not knowing what happens to Pike, but knowing he'll survive, but in some sort of broken state, in some way he can't, in some way that Pike can't live with, that Pike himself would consider worse than death. And we don't have to see him lay down and write the plans, but just a Spock that I can go, this man went off with Kirk and formulated a plan for when this happened to Pike. And so you have this amazing story. And then you got to Spock. And I don't know why they tasked someone to write a scene with Spock and Pring and not even tell them that there were Vulcans in the scene. I think the only thing that actually worked in that scene was there was a Vulcan waiter who was very quick on shooing public displays of affection away. Now, they were public displays of affection between two Vulcans, so it doesn't work. But at least that guy was a Vulcan. I've talked about the character assassination of Spock. Do you want me to go through it? Let's start with the fact that Spock and T'Pring never met until Amok Time. Let's then go to the fact that Vulcan marriages are arranged, and well, I suppose you could have, some symbolic, you're human, I'm gonna ask you to marry me kind of thing. Like, the intention is Spock was waiting to be asked to be married, like he wanted this. They're getting married anyway. You also had the weird, courtship ritual, which also kind of breaks that Spock never met T'Pring. That's fine normally, but whatever, that's a little thing. You then had the Vulcans kissing, and not doing their adorable finger-touchy thing, which my partner adores. God, they're gonna be crushed by that. You took, then, the Vulcans who wanted to have some sexy time, not during a Pon farr, they just felt like it, and T'Pring was annoyed that she couldn't get it. You made Robert April black for representation reasons. Well done. I get my argument a lot in that there are some things more important than Star Trek. And this is one of them, where I don't really think it being April adds anything. You could have just had some new guy, but I'm not gonna fight it. Vulcans are amazing. I've said before that they are, accidentally, of course, from when they were created, they are the race of autistic people, as someone with autism. But another thing that they're an amazing representation for is asexuality. They're a race of asexuality. The Pon farr is some weird thing off to the side, but it still does work. I mean, many people who are asexual and are going to have kids are going to have sex. Or adopt, but if they want biological kids, they're going to have sex. And the Vulcans are an amazing asexual representation. And I'd say that I've never seen a race so misunderstood, but they're not Vulcans. It's just someone wasn't told they were writing for Vulcans. It's not that they didn't know what a Vulcan was, they just actually weren't told. And I spent the remainder of the episode stuck, at least to some degree, on that. In general, those scenes with Pike and Spock were pretty good. It was interesting kind of seeing Spock is almost so totally emotionless, which if you're going off of the yes, Captain, one of your human emotions kind of thing, from the first proper TOS episode, then you'd kind of have to have a Spock like that. Very different from our Discovery Spock, of course. But it was weird seeing that, and I'm never going to be able to look at Ethan Peck and go, that is Spock. I just can't. I'll sure as hell never be able to look at those Vulcans as Vulcans. I don't even have to try and mesh these Vulcans into canon in my head, because in my head they're just not Vulcan. It's baffling. Discovery had an amazing, the best Vulcan portrayal in the Vulcan president, especially after that Romulan reunification. And it's interesting because you could argue, well, you just have to get used to the face. I love Doctor Who, right? I mean, every time the Doctor regenerates, you can get a feel of, they're not the Doctor yet, because, they're just some random person, but, I'll see him as the Doctor by the end of a series or something, by a few episodes, But for Ethan Peck, it's just, no, you're not. Like, I know some of Spock's family, is it his daughter or wife? Some of Leonard Nimoy's family. I've praised him and his portrayal of it, but just I don't know what it is. The way he talks isn't quite right. The character he's given, and that's not an Ethan Peck. I don't know about his enunciation, the way he talks and stuff, what exactly it is about that. But the character he's given, which is the fault, or not the fault for anyone, it's the responsibility of writers, producers, kind of everyone but the actor almost, just isn't right. And we're going to try not to rant about Ethan Peck's Spock every single episode, but I do kind of have to address it on this first time. All right, what do we got after that? Let's pivot to something positive. I did quite like, we know Kirk's coming in season 2. I did kind of like the Kirk fake out where I'm like, no, it said season 2, what's this? And then it was just some guy, Samuel Kirk, which I did have to check. Kirk did have a brother who was George Samuel Kirk, and also did have quite the 60s pedo mustache, which does explain why this Kirk does. At first, I thought that Strange New World had given us the image of the actual James T. Kirk with some sort of weird pedo mustache. I don't know if I want that or not. Kind of weird, again, that you think maybe that'd be brought up. I don't remember Spock's reaction if he was like, you had a brother? What? In, I'm not gonna know the episode. It was a season 3 one, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, Kirk had a brother who died, and his wife, the brother's wife died. The brother had a nephew, actually. He was pretty young. He might not be born yet. I'm not sure. But, they're playing around with age. Robert April is way older than he appears in this, in the animated series. But that was quite a fun fake out. I actually am kind of annoyed. With modern Star Trek in general, Lower Decks gets a little bit of a pass because it's kind of its thing. But the references in live-action Star Trek, with this past season of Picard and Strange New Worlds, have kind of become intrusive, almost, where they feel the need to constantly do it, is what it feels like. I don't recall that for Discovery Season 4. I think they found a good balance. I wonder if Discovery Season 4 was filmed before Lower Decks released. That might be interesting to check. I don't think it would have been. But anyways, it's the point where, you had that shot of the Enterprise. You gotta have the beauty shot flying around the Enterprise. But before that, they're on the Stamets. Why? Well, because Stamets was in Discovery. That's the name of the shuttle. And so it's almost like you can't have these iconic scenes without focusing on you're watching Star Trek. Now, often it works. You want these kind of references, world-building references is what it be. It makes sense that Stamets would have a shuttle. But even when you have, or Uhura in Chapel have got to introduce themselves. Why? Well, because they're in the original series. It's funny. They haven't met. God, I'm struggling to think of some specific examples, but I've talked about it in Picard a lot as well. I kind of wish they'd pull that back a bit and just kind of do their own thing. As I said with the casting, kind of realizing, it was with Kirk's announcement, how much of the classic cast is in here. I want strange new worlds, is kind of the feeling that I get. But hey, it's not the worst thing. Let's talk about the other big elephant in the room with discussing my getting my bearings, is canon. I'm pretty sure this episode alone has broken the plots of just about every single original series episode. What have we got off the top of my head? Emergency communication calls. I'd like to point out all of these are great ideas. But remember what I said in my intro, a lot of the biggest problems with Discovery were its setting. Specifically its setting in the timeline. because it did things that just weren't around yet. And the fact that this is the Enterprise means that at some point in the future, really soon, someone looked at these ideas and went, get rid of them. We don't need these. And that includes emergency, communicators, emergency communications, which solves a lot of episodes of Star Trek, actually. Replicators, or at least through the transporter, they used replicators. We know Discovery had replicators. The original series does not. Usually they could find the clothing. And I get it's a really nice plot device, and it's something that makes sense that you could just kind of swap the clothes. Feels really risky that, like, well, what if it doesn't work? And you're just down in the middle of the planet. Like when Spock said, "Captain, where are my pants?" I thought he was actually in his underwear. I didn't realize he was just wearing shorts that honestly weren't particularly revealing, especially with those boots. I thought he had a tattoo for a second as well, but I think it was just the spots. So you had those. You had Starfleet, the Federation, authorizing genetic experiments and mutations to alter the outward appearance of officers, but not their inward anyway. Like, just, I guess for Spock, you'd have to remove ears. I mean, classic the original series of just sending Spock down, even though he's, like, the worst choice. The Federation. Like, really. They are absurdly against genetic engineering. And, like, it makes sense as an idea, but I feel there are other options. And even when they're like, is it safe? Oh, usually. That's might be a joke. That's probably a joke. But it's like, oh, Spock, you're Vulcan physiology. We've never really done this before. It's complicated. We're not sure how well it will work. Also, you're half human. It might wear off soon. We really don't know. Anyway, I'm going to inject you. We don't really know what this is going to do. We're just going to mess with your DNA for a bit. Like, it just seemed weird and irresponsible. It is what's going on. I was analyzing it. Okay, they need this because they need Spock to, like, kind of fail. They need the tension. Like, the plot needs something in the disguise to go wrong. I get that. So as I like to do in these reviews, okay, so I have a problem, right? And we have something that needs to happen. How do we fix this, right? What's an alternative that gets the job done just as well? And I'll concede, I couldn't think of one that was quite as good. Well, like, because you have the eye scanner, right? You could kind of get rid of that. I guess it is a high security thing. Special contacts. Yeah, you could just have special contacts that copy the retina of the alien species and you get by. You don't then have the tension of the beam thing. But maybe when they get the guys unconscious on board, it's like, oh, we misunderstood their eyes. Something about Spock's, doesn't he have, like, an extra layer because he's a Vulcan? His eyes have some sort of extra layer to protect them from the sun. T'Pol had that. Maybe it's like, oh, because of his Vulcan eyes, looking at these eyes, Spock's might not actually work, and then they have to beam a new contact on his eye. That would work. Editing Nathan here with a much better counterexample, because I've just realized that the eye scanner was checking if the people had the eyes of their species. Not any one individual's eye, because the Enterprise didn't have access to that. It was just checking if the eye was the right species. So maybe you change the plot to make sense. And then maybe when they're getting Uhura, or getting the people from the prison, it feels kind of contrived to have his ears, like, hit something and fall off or whatever. Maybe he could have an allergic reaction to it. That's still kind of dumb. But hey, I mean, the fact that they did the genetic experiment on Spock is kind of dumb. But maybe he gets in some sort of scuffle and it gets knocked off, or maybe you could go that route. So, like, I'll concede that it's kind of a necessary plot thing, and you can give reasons why the Federation stops doing it, because, it's genetic engineering. But, and especially with Chapel, it's Chapel doing it. And so you can't say that Chapel didn't know how to do it in a few years. But, like, you need to kind of explain why they did it in the first place to me. I couldn't tell as well, was the Enterprise cloaked at the end? Because Pike gave the order, like, in low orbit, show them what you got, yada yada, but, like, they were right above the city. TOS orbits are absurdly low, given, like, how quickly they deorbit without power. We know this. We know TOS does not do orbital mechanics, but, like, if they were that close to being able to go above the city in seconds, then they could be seen already if they weren't cloaked. For example, well, consider this. Moving through the atmosphere, the Enterprise is not aerodynamic, and it's huge. When you're moving through the atmosphere, you're going to displace air. You always will. If they have to move from space to the ground, off the top of my head, I don't know how long a typical deorbit is. It is not seconds. It's going to be a few minutes, I'm pretty sure. If you move too fast, you're going to damage the actual city. If you move faster than the speed of sound, you're going to create a sonic boom, and when you're going to the city, you're going to slam this major, probably capital, with a sonic boom. And that didn't happen. So it means the Enterprise, even if it was in orbit right above the city, if it moved down at maximum speed, that's more than the speed of sound. It's gotta be. And so, were they cloaked? I don't really get it. I'm not gonna say they have cloaks. I mean, as I said, that's a true return to the original series. It's just weird distancing. Oh yeah, that was another one. Spock was on Vulcan. They're taking the Enterprise out right away, and Spock met Pike in Earth? In the original series, isn't it like at least a day to get from Vulcan to Earth? Like, it's a few hours in the Next Generation. Why didn't the Enterprise just pick him up? I guess because you need the scene of leaving space dock? It was a lot of those, it just didn't quite gel, the details. And so this is the setting my expectations of, it was fun, I enjoyed this episode. But yeah, you got these little things that are just not going to work. And as inherent flaws of when they've chosen to set the show and how they're dealing with it, it's not going to work. The engineering is cavernous. I think Spike's quarters. Pike said, like, I'll be in my quarters, left the bridge, and Spock came to visit him in a place that had, like, 3 bars and was massive. I'm not sure if that's Pike's quarters. It was a bit weird. But I think I'm getting too much into... The point is that, yes, they have technology that's already broken every episode of the original series. They're better than Discovery. I mean, they're not doing the hologram stuff. But, yeah, I mean, that's what we're getting. I have my expectations. I know what they are now. And I know that it's, by and large, not really gonna prevent my enjoyment, but it is certainly gonna bother me and prevent, like, a scene from being risen to perfect. Let's talk about Pike's resolution to the episode, right? Great moral theming, great theming, you know, this was definitely more, they have a message they want to tell and they did it, but, The Sound of Thunder is a Discovery episode that everybody loves. I did not watch Discovery as it came out back then. I caught up when Picard came out, season 1. And The Sound of Thunder was an episode I watched. That is the one where they go to Kaminar, by the way, and kind of liberate the Kelpians. That's the word. The Sound of Thunder was an episode I watched that ruined Pike for me because he was kind of the best captain, and then I saw what was probably the most amoral, negligent, inconsiderate, and illegal mission of any Star Trek. And just without acknowledging that at all, everyone was kind of on board with doing the right thing. And I remember when I went online, because it was so bad, I have to vent with other people about this. I learned that many people saw it as the best episode of season 2 and one of the best of Star Trek, except one guy who had a big essay that was like, why are you all like this? Here are the reasons this is clearly wrong. I might link that post in the description, actually, if I can find it, if you want to read. I won't talk about it, because I could literally make a 3-hour video about why The Sound of Thunder is what I've just described. This was not that bad, but let's go through his plan. So, Faction A has, a warp bomb. I don't really get what a warp bomb is. I would assume, well, maybe it's like a subspace thing, right? I was assuming maybe it's like an antimatter bomb, but I guess maybe subspace. You have up this bomb that's devastating, right? I got the impression it's technically better than a nuke, like it wasn't going to destroy the planet. War could destroy the planet, but it's not like you were going to get in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. You were just going to get ruins. And so Faction A wants to use it against Faction B, and wipe them out. Thinking about it, I mean, this is bad, right? But it's actually, that's not World War III, because only one of them has the weapon. I guess the Soviets developed nukes pretty soon after America, but like if they actually are wiping out the other faction, I'm not sure this situation really applies, and we'll get into why that matters. Or rather is the same. But anyway, they want to do that, right? And so Pike tries to stop them, and understandably, Lei's like, no. he is kind of condescending as well, or his language is, rather. He probably could have handled that better. And so she's like, the person with the biggest stick wins. And Pike's like, all right, I got the biggest stick. Let me call the Enterprise. And first off, kind of problematic reasoning. I've got the bigger stick. I win. It's like, hey, let me push my morals on you. Oh, that didn't work. Diplomacy didn't work. Well, let's go the stick route. But his plan is to reveal the Enterprise, an aircraft carrier-sized ship. If you want to go by Strange New Worlds rules, twice as big as that. You can see what this looks like. Look up TMP Enterprise Las Vegas. Up here, that above, basically New York is kind of what I treat it as. Like a big major city, maybe even DC. And you can hear, the screams of everyone outside. As cars crash, people panic. What are the possible things that could happen if the Enterprise appears over New York, right? If an alien ship appeared over New York, what could happen? Well, yes, cars could crash, a riot could ensue, mass panic globally. I mean, what are their intentions? Like, what is this? It's this aircraft carrier hovering above New York. Are we gonna die? Like looting, rioting, murder. It's like, or not that. But it's a maybe. I refuse to accept that nobody was seriously injured, at least, when an alien spaceship appeared above the major city. And basically, if I was the president, my intention is that these aliens have just brought their mega warship in to threaten me to not use the weapon, which is, it's not a great place to start diplomacy. That, understandably, triggers a meeting between the two major factions of like, we've got an imminent global crisis on our hands. What are we gonna do? And so then Pike beams down into the middle of that meeting, in classic TOS style, completely undermining the sovereignty of this meeting and just budging into their politics. Somehow takes over the view screen. He's like, let me put these images on your monitor that I just have prepared kind of on a whim. I just have these. And he gives the speech about what could happen if these weapons get used, which again is kind of weird because it didn't feel like a nuke. It felt kind of like just a really big bomb that didn't have any effects after the explosion. Like, the problem wasn't the bomb. The problem was bombing a city, presumably, like a city. Like, if you use a nuke in a war field, only military casualties, you have contaminated that area for a very long time, and you've increased the radiation of the entire planet. It's horrible, right? The problem with using a nuke in war isn't that you're using a bomb. It's that it's a nuke. And so kind of like, you'll destroy your planet. I mean, you could get a mutually assured destruction thing, and it'd still be bad. But it did feel weird where it was kind of different. And his images as well of like, this was Earth before it all went wrong. I'm like, okay, this is Manhattan, Paris, DC. Do you want to show like the problems? It's not, we were like you. It's like, no, we used to have worse buildings. But it's like, okay, just the scene as he went. And then he left, right? And they might try to make the peace. It's going to be a hard peace. And I'm willing to accept, I mean, his first contact, just the knowledge you're not alone in the universe brings the people together. But imagine our politicians right now. I mean, pick a country. Most people aren't particularly happy with their politicians and how they handle major world events right now. It's also possible that you haven't really fixed things. You've just also added the complication of the panic of like the knowledge there are aliens out there. Because when you just leave, and maybe you've inspired the people to want to change. And yes, that will eventually bring about change. But look around you. Eventually. Like, if the leader still wants to hit the nuke button, Well, then they have. It was a solution that kind of worked out in the end, but really didn't quite make sense. Could have gone way worse. I don't really think solved the problem, and was kind of fluffy in the end as well. And it's thinking about Earth. Do I think that seeing an Earth like actually nuked and devastated would have an effect on Earth and maybe even prevent total nuclear war? Yeah, if you could somehow get hands down and like into that reality. I don't think it would prevent it for everyone, like the wrong leader still, but maybe it would. It would prevent it from most, sorry. But even just like a picture from space, like I firmly believe in the observer effect. If we could send people to space, what's one of the Apollo astronauts quotes? You just want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, bring him 300 million miles away and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. But like just seeing Earth from space kind of on fire, you see pictures of Earth now from space, and that doesn't bring about the full observer effect. And to these aliens, this is just some other world. It's like pointing to Venus and being like, this could be Earth. Yeah, like after climate change, like, yeah, I can see a picture of Venus. Not particularly impactful. It's Venus. Yep, I've seen that before. Is this one of those where I seem more negative than I did? Because I left enjoying the episode. Again, I'm not, like, totally in love with the series. That beginning, was amazing. You have a potential for, like, a perfect episode in here. I just think there's gonna be too much, well, in part, canon problems, part Spock, but also, honestly, too much original series to have a truly perfect episode. Because to me, you can't have the original series without those weird, campy 60s problems. As I said, I enjoy it. I love a good, some original series. And scooping out the sexism, the class problem, all the problems of the 60s. Scooping that out of the original series would just make it so much better. And that's what this is. But the original series to me is also, well, that doesn't quite work. Your actions are really irresponsible. I guess the ends justify the means legally now, but still, you can leave that enjoyable. And the original series does have amazing episodes. Some that are just supposed to be dumb fun, like Spock's Brain. Yes, it is an outstanding episode. Some that don't really deal with sci-fi elements too much. Sitting on the Edge of Forever, Balance of Terror. Balance of Terror is a submarine episode. Like, it's not a sci-fi. But even the greats, like Amok Time, I mentioned before. Is Amok Time really that good that we'll have like 3 episodes with names parried after it and go back to it so much? And that you kind of overuse it to the point of tribbles? Like, was it really that good? Let's get into the scene by scene now. Let's let my thoughts kind of get more controlled. And how long until my interview? I've got an hour. Let's go to the scene by scene. You have, if you don't recognize it, a Freedom-class starship, or rather a precursor. I think the Freedom is a 24th century Wharf 359 ship. Eaglemox makes a model of it. That's how I know its name. Kind of JJ-esque to me, but certainly something that's going to go on my shelf in, well, probably quite a few years, actually, the way Eaglemoss puts out these ships. I have to say, though, I am getting more accustomed to these non-traditional, by which I mostly mean non-tuna cell variant ships. They are becoming a bit more natural to me now. I find it weird seeing a Star Trek that's like really going for PG, but like also really pushing that PG. Like you've kind of imposed this limit yourself, but you also really want to break past it. Also, what time did Pike get up? It's 6 in the morning. I know it's 6 in the morning because there was a blizzard outside and this is Montana. This is not 6 p.m. Some people may have missed it, especially if you don't really follow the news releases and you just watch the shows. But when I mentioned Robert April, this guy is Robert April. He called him Bob, Robert. I don't know if they ever identified him as Robert April, who, if you don't know, was the original captain of the Enterprise before Pike. So Discovery mentioned him a few times, but his main appearance, and really his only in classic, actually his only proper appearance, is in the animated series, The Counterclock Incident, where he appeared as a really old white guy. And so that's why some of you might not have recognized that this was Robert April, same guy. He looks great as a captain. I have to say, like the guy, I've seen people do animated drawings of like him in the animated series style in the original Robert April uniform, and he looks amazing. He is also different in every way from the original Robert April. Trust a non-binary person to just completely ignore the fact that he is the same sex. But ultimately, I was annoyed by it as a change. I kind of found it funny. He was the anti-Guinan, where Guinan, the only thing that stayed the same about her recast was her human race. Basically, everything about this guy is kind of the same, just a younger version, except his race. But, because he was so minor of a character, and because honestly, that guy looks great as a captain. I know he's an admiral, but like he's got the captain stance. Then, and again, my argument of there are some things more important than Star Trek. The biggest examples, you can look them up if you're not familiar with him, are the ending of Deep Space Nine was changed because of Sisko being black and certain stereotypes about black fathers at the time. It's a pretty well-known story, look it up. This is a long enough video anyway. And the other is Adira needing a coming out in the 32nd century, or even just to 23rd century people. Here, right now, in Bellingham, a more liberal area of Washington, but still, I've seen in other places, like some job reviews around the place, you introduce yourself by, "Hi, my name is Nathan, they, them." Like, we're already past that need for coming outs in some places. I've talked about both these things before a lot. There are some things that are just more important. And so, you know what? This old white guy is now a older but slightly younger black guy. Yeah, go ahead. I don't think they gained much being Robert April. Maybe it'll come apparent later. Like, if they wanted someone who was completely different to the original Robert April for representation reasons, I'm not sure why they didn't just say, "Oh, this is Admiral Jiminy Jew. It's an Andorian name." But it's alright. Also, is it just me, or is this shuttle a TARDIS? I talked about the intro sequence before on my channel. It was kind of funny. On the first viewing, I went, hang on a minute, this is what I've always asked for. But I hate remixes. This is awful. On the second viewing, I realized you have the speech bit where it's like, do, 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 do. You got that music. And then you got some drummy stuff after, like, no one has gone before. Kudos, by the way, on No One Has Gone Before. And 5-Year Mission. That's the right way for Strange New Worlds. So you have that. And then you go the da-da-da-da. If you just remove that drum bit in the middle, it's the perfect theme. That drum bit is criminal. You can't space out the plinky plonky in the main theme. It's criminal. The credits are moving incredibly fast. I would imagine that maybe they needed to pad the theme a bit. But that's criminal. Other than that, though, perfect intro. I find it interesting as we go through these sets how brilliantly they're done, because they aren't what the original series was, they're how you remember the original series, by and large. The bridge, especially, though. How, when I'm watching these, despite that, often I kind of realize again, oh, we're on the Enterprise. Like, we're on this one right here. Like, it's just kind of another starship in my head, which is going to help with the canon issues, and as well with Spock, where it's like he's just not Spock in my head, so I don't really have to reconcile what he does, but I can keep the good things, like how we kind of learns more about what's going to happen to Pike. But I wonder if that will change, if I'll ever look at this ship as the Enterprise. A good comparison, actually, is if you're a fan of Doctor Who, at least for me, when you look at the TARDIS, it is the TARDIS. It is always the TARDIS. You can differentiate the differences. I mean, if you compare this to this, that's the wrong way around. Like, those are different. Like, someone else probably wouldn't even recognize that's the same object. But when it comes to the Doctors, it is also the same guy. Or the same person nowadays. But it's the same person. Although, in my head, they are more differentiated. John Pertwee is pretty different from Tom Baker. And I know it's the same person doing the same things, but you usually don't quite see them. And often it's a bit of a reset when you get a new Doctor, what they're like. And you don't tie their actions together as strongly as you do, this is the TARDIS. Even when it changes, this is the TARDIS. So it's like, I know it's the Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, or D, or E, or D, blah, blah, blah. But it's that Doctor Who kind of same ship, where it's the previous regeneration, and it's going to eventually regenerate into my Enterprise. Why is the engineering a TARDIS console? Actually, I've just realized that. I was going to complain about how cavernous it is, but I guess it is actually a TARDIS. And vertical warp cores. You know, one of the things I really loved about Enterprise was its warp core, because it didn't do the up and down thing. It did a vertical warp core, because that's what the technology was. Sorry, a horizontal warp core, because that's what TOS had. They hadn't invented vertical yet. You could argue maybe this is experimental. Well, then why'd they get rid of it in a few years and go to the horizontal one that I think you also see on the wall? And it's cavernous, because I guess engineering rooms? Okay, that's unfair. Discovery's not cavernous when it's Paul's lab. They're playing with their set again, and I don't like it. See, this is what I want. Don't use your big, LED screen unnecessarily. Just invest the money. This season is going to go on. This series is going to go on for years. It's going to get a full run. Whatever that is. 7, 10, 5, maybe just 5-year mission. It's going to get a full run. And this doesn't really fit with the original episode. Enterprise is way too big, is too two-dimensional for the original series-esque style they're going for. But it's there. And it's an actual sensible space. And it's infinitely better than the engineering room. And it fits. This is the room I was talking about. Is this really Pike's quarters? Because, it's just a bunch of stools, really. There's no real bed or coffee table or anything. It's a weird bar that no one's in but Pike. And it's huge. Kirk's quarters. Could you just imagine being Kirk, going to the Enterprise, and having, my dorm is bigger than Kirk's room. Even shared, I have more space than Kirk did. This is bigger than Picard's. And remember when, by that I mean on the Enterprise D. And remember when Scotty got there in Relics, and he's like, this random crew quarters is better than an admiral would get. Because I adored this scene. I adored how they're handling Pike and the knowledge of his future and how that's going. I wonder how that'll continue, because this said, original episodic storytelling, modern serialized characters. That was the pitch. And I mean, that's what made Deep Space Nine so great by and large. Sprinkle in a bit more serialized story, but yeah, that's what made Deep Space Nine great. So they did kind of the Pike's gotten over it, we're done original episode. We could leave this, and I'm happy to accept that Pike's dealing with it internally and learning how to live with it. Or we could keep coming back to it now, every now and then, and I don't know which way they're going to go. It would be interesting to see how this continues. Is it a series thing, a season thing? Is this the bookend? Because this was a beautiful story about Pike, ignoring all the alien stuff and the complications that don't quite make a lot of sense I went through. This was a story about Pike and his trauma, his future trauma, really, and it was done perfectly in that lens. And so is this the bookend? Is episode 10 going to kind of complement this? Is this an ongoing thing, or are we done? It's interesting to see. But given that this kind of thing was the best part about this episode by far, I am happy to have more of it. I have to say, looking at rooms like this, the original series was always right with funky colors. With funky colors in its decoration. That usually meant white walls, kind of off gray, carpeted. Ah, damn it, oh, wait, is this room semi-carpeted? I can't tell. I might pretend it is. But anyway, yeah. In the funky lights, that would look weird. I'd accept that in a modern show. I think it might have been fun to play around. I hope they did try it. Be like, what happens if, these highlights are green, But I appreciate the direction they're kind of going of the white with these very bright furniture. It's all red, maybe a bit more aesthetically pleasing. I don't quite like the clinical white look. Kind of the JJ style. I've never really liked that in Star Trek or even sci-fi in general so much, Discovery manages to pull it off well in their futuristic-y way. I don't know quite what makes them different, but this kind I've never been a big fan of, but the coloring does help distract from that nature in most rooms like this. And the corridors are a great example where that doesn't happen. Oh yeah, but this scene also did the weird thing where it's like, the Vulcans invented first contact. I'm sorry, they did? Isn't there a story about Klingons making first contact with Vulcan by destroying their ship? Aren't there millennia of aliens before Vulcan who have all lived and died? Vulcan made first contact with humanity. They might have laid down the groundwork for the Federation's first contact principles, but Vulcans invented first contact is the most pompous-ass Enterprise-era Vulcan thing I've ever heard, and it belongs 100 years ago. Not now, and certainly not from Spock. And especially just be brushed aside by Pike as like, yeah, you Vulcans and your... It's like, no, you just didn't invent first contact. Hang on a minute. This is a proof that the transporter is a death machine, right? Because where'd their original clothes go? If you say it got turned into their new clothes, right? It just rearranged the atoms. Well, then that implies that the new clothes have exactly the same mass or like stuff in them, subatomic particles, as the old clothes. And look at Spock. But secondly, that says that has to be the case. Otherwise, like, the spare energy has to go in a battery, or you have to draw energy to do that. And if their clothes are being destroyed and new things are being put in their place, that is also true for the people. We already have plenty of definitive proof the transporters are murder machines, but here's another one for the books. I forgot one. Emergency medical transporter. That's something that in 5 years' time, someone's going to go, you know what, that emergency medical transporter, which I am certain we are going to see used in many make the different cases, like this one, we don't need that anymore. And everyone who's ever died on the Enterprise in the original series because they didn't get to sickbay fast enough or because sickbay didn't get to them, welcome to this. Handy plot device when you don't have site-to-site transports? Absolutely. But well, this is a problem they've solved before in the original series. You know what? Looking at these pictures, which don't, like, I don't react to those pictures like the people in this crowd. I suppose I know it's fiction, but, like, I have connections to icons like Paris and New York and DC. If these people have really... This warp bomb is their first big bomb. Like, if they don't have nukes, this is going to be an outstanding shot. I mean, actually, God, Paris is in fantastic shape for World War III. Oh my God. Like, that's not a nuke, that's just a light bombing. But, like, if these people have never had their World War I, like, they've been in tension or conflict, I don't know. Like, World War I was a big thing for the world, or at least Europe, I suppose, where it was the first time both sides had modern weaponry, and it was devastating. It was a completely different type of war. Like, no one even knew how to fight it. World War II was the first time humanity had weapons of mass destruction, where you could just get rid of a city. And Hiroshima and Nagasaki were huge moments for that, and huge shock moments. I've lived my whole life in a world where several individuals on a whim could just destroy the world if they wanted to. I've lived in a world where twice humanity has become the right person in the wrong place at the right time, preventing the end of the world. Twice. If these people haven't had some World War I experience, especially, but if they just haven't had like a nuke, these pictures honestly are still like, you know, just a light bombing. But the pictures of a planet on fire, of total societal collapse, would be shocking. And that might make a big difference. It might make the difference. So you know what? I think I might be more forgiving of this episode's resolution than was originally. It's still certainly not watertight, but it's definitely better than it was. Oh yeah, this image. which was like weirdly powerful. And I think you had as well, like, yeah, the Earthfire. Like, yeah, that would be powerful. And yeah, it massively over exaggerated everything, like the nukes from space. It didn't, but like, that's standard TV. One thing that I did find weird, I keep forgetting to mention, is America's second Civil War. This is news to me. Because when Spock brought it up, I was like, wait, what's he talking about? Like, is that the Revolutionary War? Because we have the Civil War, like, duh, the American Civil War, the civil rights, slavery one. But there's, like, the Star Trek timeline is basically our timeline until about the 60s. And from the 60s, we got a pretty complete history. Like, there's the eugenics wars. We know World War III. Like, there's not a lot of room for an American Civil War. Yeah, Picard, it's like Pike, I'm going to do that a lot. It's going to P name. Picard, wow. Pike said that, those tensions. Well, first off, that things started going wrong in the 21st century, which was wrong. He cited the eugenics wars as a 21st century thing, which is also wrong. They're the 90s. But he said, like, the American Civil War kind of led into the eugenics wars, leading in. So, like, did the American Civil War start the eugenics wars? Maybe it's a war over eugenics? I don't know. I was just kind of weirded. Like, you're going to fit another war somewhere in here? And then he mentioned, like, as well, is the, like, city was being destroyed. Like, a war that killed 600 million. And I'm like, that's really good for World War III. Like, all these cities being destroyed. He's like, species. Oh. Yeah, that's a lot. Kind of weird he didn't mention the death count. I think we know the death count of World War III from other Star Treks. Not off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure we know it. And then you have this amazing montage of look at all the Prime Directive violations and how we've turned this species of cells into almost like some godlike goal for this species. You have nailed the original series. And I find it weird when he was like, or you could join our Federation. I don't think you can, but I think he might have meant it more looking at this as well as like you could go towards the path of destruction and extinction, or you could go to the path of coming out into space and like becoming a part of the galactic community. I don't think it was a straight offer, but Pike had something as well, Spock did, where he mentioned pre-warp species in the Federation, which looks like it was an original series thing, but really doesn't quite make sense. Again, the original series does not quite gel with the rest of canon when society basically invented the concept of canon. I've just realized that this is a Jupiter station. I don't think it's the Jupiter station. Kind of weird it's in Jupiter with these big pods. It's the Starbase 1 original design. I don't know if it is Starbase 1. Probably not, because they mentioned the pods being there from before. It felt weird that humanity could do that, those pods, 2 years after what we see in Picard, where we're pretty good, but I don't think we're that good that we could bring a mountain into space. I mean, nice story and all, but again, it's those little details where I guess humanity was pretty. We had sleeper ships. I don't know if we had colonies. We might have. I'd have to check that. Did we have colonies? We could send manned missions to Europa. So I guess about here, but yeah, that one was a bit weird to me. Lovely set though. This is using your LED space to good use, because you have a great little set, a great design, but in the Starbase through the windows, you get those views. You get the things we saw out the window, like cities and these massive structures, or where this LED screen works and you need to use it. Not the engineering room or the random planet of the week. Using it cleverly like this is how you make it mean something and not have people go, oh, look, you're using your LED screen. Like, it's fantastic. Also, I did not watch the coming up in the season because I don't like those kind of spoilers. I'd avoid everything but these, just watching the episodes if I could, but just nature of the job, I can't do that. So try not to discuss that in the comments without some sort of spoiler notice. But yeah, Strange New Worlds. Hey, I'm going to enjoy this series. It is exactly what it pitched. It is a modern original series. Take the original series, gut out all of the problematic natures, not all the problems, but all the problematic natures, which is key. Just sprinkle in some of that modern serialized character storytelling. Not storytelling, maybe a bit. I wouldn't mind some things we come back to, you know, some two-parters, some series like the Klingon arc in the Next Generation that we came back to every now and then, or the Q arc, this like that kind of serialized telling. I'd love that. Some like every now and then. Don't overdo it, you know. But that's exactly what it is, and it. I don't think it'll ever be my favorite Star Trek. I'm not sure it'll ever produce a truly perfect episode. It might need to, you know, settle, find its footing a bit. But I mean, I'm gonna love this series because it's the modern original series in every way, and I think that's charming in some ways. It's charming that the solutions aren't perfect, might even cause damage. It's charming. It's capturing the camp without being campy almost, which it'd be fine if they be campy. I'd love a campy episode every now and then, but kind of that not really thinking it through. It doesn't work, but it's an enjoyable enough experience, has a good message, is a good group of people, and yeah, I'm excited for the next 10 weeks. We might have some bumps in my reviews. I hope you'll join me for the whole seasons, but the transition from college to not to working, we might have some bumps. Who knows, but I'll still try and get through all of them. And yeah, it's good to have another good Star Trek on the air. The outro music is not a perfect rendition of the original series' classic credits music. It does give an attempt, and it does have that peak theremin action, but too modern. You did try. C plus B minus. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.